Hey, Dan.
Hey Scott, how you doing?
Good. How are you doing, man?
Good. Thanks for meeting. This is cool. Yeah, I after you contacted me after you commented on that video, I checked out a couple of. I haven't actually watched all your videos yet, but I've kind of got them queued up. And I talked about you in the last Saturday's session of the book club, and in that one we are reading Piketty's new book, Brief History of Equality. So it's not really about the note taking, although occasionally it is. We did actually read Sonky Aaron's book together, and people had kind of different takes on it.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the, that book is, I think, I've got issues with some of the details and implementations because I've had to like reverse engineer Lumen's actual, system and do it the hard way and spend many months and a
right.
lot of my time at doing that.
Mm,
However, on the good news is, I don't know, it seems like just a great introductory book. It's short, simple, and it's kind of like inspiring. So it gets people. It's kind of like the I would say, well, maybe there's a better way of saying this, but like the gateway drug into the world of knowledge
yeah.
management, knowledge development, note
Mm,
taking. It's there's no diagrams, so it's a little vague, and a lot of people can
right.
misinterpret what he says. But it gets people, I think, really. It introduces them to this whole world of, oh,
Mhm,
I wonder if there's a way to like rethink how I'm actually consuming information,
right.
extracting it, turning it into knowledge, and developing it. Yeah.
Right.
So
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. It was. Yeah. I think he sort of kind of overpromised a little bit and under delivered a little bit. But I do think I do think that it's actually kind of it is an interesting gateway drug or an interesting way in. There some of the people in actually several of the people in the book club knew you or knew of you. I don't know that you know any of them personally. Chris Aldrich might be
oh yeah.
the most familiar to you. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's
Yeah, that guy is brilliant. If you want to know the ins and outs and deep history of note taking, and even
and
beyond.
commonplace books going back to the
Yeah,
15th century. Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because the first book that we read together back God, it must have been last spring. It's been about 9 months, a year that we've been doing this. Was the Graeber Wengrow book, The Dawn of Everything. And so we were, kind of looking at the distant past, and so that, gave us an opportunity to talk about, other, like braiding sweetgrass and other kinds of um, things that got into the ways that people sort of trained their brains to do
hmm,
things. And so Chris had a lot to contribute about memory palaces, and and
oh
just
yeah,
the way that especially pre-literate societies did that kind of stuff. But Yeah, it was interesting for me because I actually kind of my wrote my dissertation, God, about less than 10 years ago, I guess.
hmm,
Seems like a hell of a long time. I guess it was actually really only about, I finished it only about 5, 6 years ago. And I had been, I had been off of I'd been kind of away from the research for 4 or 5 years, really. I had done a bunch of research around 2012, and then I had sort of let it sit till 2016. And then I had kind of a wake up call, and I said, well, maybe I should finish this thing.
hmm,
And so I went back to all of that stuff. And so I had that, kind of cold files issue,
yeah,
where
yeah.
my, you know,
You kind of had to like reignite what is called like reverberation,
yeah,
and there's kind of like this interplay where notes are essentially, for the most part, especially in the analog medium, they act as cues that
yeah.
kind of trigger on a whole line of other thoughts, which really helps like the writing process. Oh, nice. You got a cat.
I got two office cats.
Yeah,
that
nice.
was one of them.
Nice.
That's the one that likes to play catch. But I've got these. I actually have this pile. I just got Amazon just delivered me a bunch of note cards.
Nice.
Two
Trying to get out
of note cards. So like 2,000 cards and two of these things that I'm going to start with.
Yep. I've got a bunch of those. Did you get 4x6 inch or 3x5?
I got 3x5 because I'm trying to keep my. I think I kind of think of the paragraph as sort of the basic unit of thought, but I like my topic sentences of the paragraphs to be what's on the cards, and I like them to be kind of succinct. And then I can, and then I can layer on evidence and data and stuff. And that's one of the things actually that has been a little bit challenging for me with the tools that I've been, especially the digital tools I've used. I used Roam Research for a little while, and then I kind of jumped over to Obsidian, and I was. And I liked Roam actually for the daily note thing. I liked sort of that practice of writing in the morning, things. And actually I'm alpha testing a new app that
there's always a new one.
that's very focused towards that calendar. And that was the thing actually that really kind of never worked that well for me was sort of connecting my Vault to my Outlook calendar or to my time. I use time to kind of keep track of what I'm doing all day long, and that sort of thing. And I'm not 100% kind of sold on that idea that it all has to be integrated, and and PKM has to be part of GTD, and it all has to be
exactly
kind of happy family. But when I went back, after like 4 or 5 years of sort of not looking at the stuff that I had gathered tons and tons. It was an American history dissertation about the early 19th century and about actually peppermint farmers across the Northeast and into the Midwest over several generations.
And these were digiral.
And they were all digital, and they were all in Tinderbox actually.
Okay.
So so I had tried, and I had tried using, and I had conversed via email with Mark Bernstein about Tinderbox, and I found Tinderbox to be super steep learning curve. And something that I never really kind of became a power user of. I did manage to get all of my primary sources. I read thousands of letters and transcribed them and took the meat and put them in these notes. So I had them all kind of queued up, but then there wasn't really any output capability. Right. So and I played around with Storyscape actually for a little while because I was also thinking about, sort of writing nonlinear fiction. And even Storyscape, I didn't think, although it did have all that ebook and HTML kind of capability, didn't really seem, and I was too cheap to buy example, ebooks that were only, could only be looked at in that format, I think at the time. And so I'm still fascinated with the idea of a nonlinear kind of a walk through, an idea space. Although I do also, I think, have to sort of accept the fact that a monograph is 99% of the time a path, a one-dimensional path through a forest of ideas, right? And so that's sort of kind of the metaphor that's in my head about this, is that my knowledge is this forest. There are a whole lot of trees that you won't touch as you walk this particular path, but the ones that you do, you will touch sort of in the arbitrary order that I tell you to because of the way that I designed the path.
And that's what people want. They want the linear path that that you create for them. which is an interesting thing, is Lumen, Nicholas Lumen, the creator of Zettelkasten, always said, it's like, if you're looking for linearity, this is not something like, you should not look to me. Like, his books are, notorious. It's for being challenging, where it's like, the one benefit, he says, is you can start anywhere, but also the negative side is that if you're new to his material and his ideas, you really can't start anywhere. There's no linear integration to the concepts, but once you kind of grasp it, and this is what, he was unapologetic in doing it this way.
Yeah.
You can really start anywhere, in his books anywhere, and any chapter.
Have you read the History of Society, or what he called the Society of Society in German?
Yes, I have both volumes. I haven't, I've perused them, or I guess not perused them, but I would say skim them,
Okay.
and yes,
Me
they're
too.
drenched in pedantic academic, 1960s, 70s, and 80s German academia, and unapologetically impenetrable, to the common public, and he did that on purpose too, because he was packing in a lot of, you could call them seemingly radical ideas. His theory of society was an anti-humanist theory of society, or an anti-human, meaning humans are not the center of society. They are, one element. Communication is an actual, and like the core element of society, and like, the people are just one agent and actor in it. And so, he didn't want to.
So are you saying that his idea was that we are like bees in the hive, and the hive is more important than the bees?
Yeah, like, and then there's this other aspect of communication is a core aspect of it, and communication is like almost like its own actor and entity, and he wanted to be able to, apply his theory of society to like where it's not just about the current times and people. Like, he wanted his theory of society, it essentially was influenced and stems from, as is systems theory, and he kind of applied systems theory and cybernetics, and even some biology type of models and conventions, like autopoiesis, which is an interesting one, which is where an organism, and he got influenced by this South American set of biologists that introduced this really interesting research, wherein like a system, a life form, an organism, and it's observed in biography, can essentially recreate itself. And he applied, so he's applied a lot of these, if you're reading it, and he says, and very plainly in there, I propose an anti-humanistic view of society. His goal was for not the general public and critics to be able to like read him. Like, he wanted to have like a very high bar for how to interpret him, because he didn't want to be, accessed by the common critics, public, and and misinterpreted. And so I think that plus, obviously, at the German, and I guess it still is like this, the German academic climate at the time, it's a badge of honor if someone reads your work, or any academics read your work, and they're utterly befuddled and confused, and it takes them 2 or 3 reads to understand what you're trying to say.
Yeah, I agree. I think that goes back to Kant, right?
Yes. So I think what we're getting at, like, we're kind of getting in the weeds here, but what we're getting at is a lot of people are like, they get attracted to this whole idea of Zettelkasten because of the whole, I would say, like, authority bias, and hey, there's this, mysterious, amazingly intellectual, brilliant, German sociologist that wrote 70 books, prolific, that wrote 70 books and 600, peer-reviewed publications in 30 years. And so the first question is, how do you do this? And then, you look and, there's the Zettelkasten method. But when you dig a little deeper, like you have, like I have, and you read Luhmann's actual output, his work, it is, very dense and confusing. And then the next question becomes, which a lot of people don't get to, it's like, wait, why do I actually want to, implement this type of system if it will make my writing insanely complex and confusing for the general public, the common reader? And the answer to that, and it's what we're kind of talking about, and is, he deliberately chose to be hard to access and hard to decipher, partly because of the German academic climate. And also he was almost this carnivalesque, trollish kind of character that, would have a smirk on his face of, saying seemingly contradictory, paradoxical things. And, like creating a theory of society that is anti-human, humanist, or anti-human. Humans aren't, but what he means by that, humans aren't at the center. But anyway, we're already down the whole the Lumen trail, but that's one interesting tidbit.
I think people do get confused about that, right? Because they hear that that his writing was sort of impenetrable. First they're impressed with the fact that he was so prolific, right? And they're like, I want that, right? And then they hear, well, his writing was impenetrable, and a lot of people hated it, right? And a lot of people thought, this guy's a shitty writer. And the one thing really doesn't have to do with the other, right? The writing style and the ability to generate ideas and to read and process information and get it ready for output. I'm not concerned with the style, right? And I have I have a similar issue with a lot of academic historians that don't, that write for peers and not for the public, right? So I have, kind of a side project of trying to communicate history in a way that is engaging and relevant to the general public. And there is a lot of writing style, and language and diction and all of that goes into that. But that's a whole separate, that's another project. So I don't really worry that much about Luman Style. I interlibrary loaned the books. They came, during the semester. I was very busy. I glanced at them and I had them on my shelf until they were due. And then I thought, should I renew them or should I just do it another time? And I decided to do it another time. So, when I retire, I'll read Luman. But in the meantime, one of the things, and I did write a list of things, and I maybe want to ask you these questions out of order. One of the things that Luhmann promised in the 1981, communicating with slip boxes, and that and that Schmidt and Krajewski seemed also to be kind of doubling down on that potential, and even Ahrens did, right? Was this sort of emergent property of the slip box, right? That it would become a conversation partner. And actually just last week we were talking about in the book club, we were talking about whether that means it's better than having an actual partner. And I think I recall Luhmann actually at one point said, it's not as good as actually having somebody to talk to who knows you, but a lot of the times we don't. And so this is the next best thing. But my question, I'm taking a long time getting to it, is, have you had that experience? Have you had that moment where there's, the slipbox has produced or shown you a connection that you had sort of forgotten about or that you weren't aware of?
Yeah. And let's talk about this. I would call this like the second mind. No, I don't call it necessarily. It's just the second brain. And there's a reason, because how Lumen called it the second memory. And he also called it his alter ego, or even in his notes when he was preparing his paper on it, he called it ghost in the box, like Zeit in, the Kasten or something. But yeah, let's jump into this. I looked at your questions as well. And, maybe I can give them after this, like a brief little background of, this crazy journey that I've been on for the past year and a half of, reverse engineering Lumen's actual analog Zettelkasten and building it out like behind me. And I can, share with you my journey in that. But why don't we jump into straight the question of have I had that conversation partner emerge? And so the one important thing I would like to state and say is that, you know, I went on the similar journey like a lot of your readers went through, it sounds like, with the How to Take Smart Notes by Zonke Arens. I was introduced to Zonke Arens when I purchased, you know, one of those, expensive 6-week long cohort courses around, you know, PKM. And, you know, I got value out of that. But one of the most valuable things I got out of that was it turned me on to Zonke Arens's book, which I had heard about and Googled, you know, Zettelkasten even before that. And, you know, I landed on like Zettelkasten DE, you know, that website. And, you know, what I read was, oh, you know, the Zettelkasten was created by a German bureaucrat, you know, and workaholic named Nicholas Lumen. And I'm like, I stopped there and I was like, okay, I don't really care about, you know, becoming a bureaucrat. That's not in my life goals, in my vision, you know, at this point. And, we'll talk about that here in a second, but you know, my vision was not to become a German bureaucrat sociologist, so I just forgot about it. But then I came across, you know, the How to Take Smart Notes, and I read that in maybe 3 or 4 days, and I took deep notes on it. And I was like, wow, this is fascinating. I actually understand, or what I thought I understood was, you know, how Nicholas Lumen's system actually worked. You know, the whole concept of fleeting notes. He called them project notes as well. There's literature notes and permanent notes. What I discovered, and then, you know, after reading that, I was like, you know, he had once innocuous sentence in there, like, you know, you can start and try the analog way, which is you start with, you know, 1, and then the next note is 1-1, and then 1-1A, and then, you know, he kind of gave this whole sample sequence. And I've later actually discovered that explanation is wrong. Like Lumen did not. He actually started with some rough, I call them fuzzy categories, as what Pinker would say, but some rough top level branches or categories. But anyway, he turned me on to actually trying the analog Zettelkasten. And it was very soon after that I was like, oh my God, this is, by the way, this is after I had created 1,000 notes, or at least files, in Obsidian. Spent 3 months, you know, creating and applying the best practices of everything I learned in the PKM course. And I was, you know, of at first, of course, taken by Obsidian, taken really by the app. The app is a beautiful app. It's snappy, it's fast. But what I was left with was, and my goal was to kind of synthesize and link together my interests, which revolves around my background is in marketing and copywriting and creating stories that really inspire people and to, you know, help motivate people in around products and services, you know, that I believe in. And so I had spent my, you know, career doing that in copywriting essentially, but I was looking to synthesize my readings across psychology, philosophy, you know, marketing, creating movements, inspiring people. And there's a lot of commonalities and themes across those subjects. And so that's how I, you know, ended up finding Obsidian after, you know, trying every tool known to man. You know, I've gone everything you can name, you know, like I've first used, I think, Evernote early on in its, you know, beginnings in 2008. You know, I've used Trello. Excel has actually been a pretty good PKM tool, believe it or not, for linking things. But anyway, so after of trying Obsidian and being like, okay, after, you know, 3.5 months of just spending a lot of time and creating, you know, 1,000 notes, applying, I would call it's a perfect vehicle, at least, you know, if you want to major in the minor. Like I restructured and refactored my whole directory scheme and everything like multiple times, you know, got lost with the shortcuts, hotkeys, CSS, loved it. Right. But then when I started in the analog way and actually developing it, I was like, oh my God, this is how it's supposed to work. And one of the things that I've always loved and found with the analog medium is, you know, taking notes and writing notes out by hand, explaining it pen to paper in your own words. And that kind of distraction-free environment allows me to really, and allows a lot of people, I think, to deeply process knowledge and information. So they can, I call it neuro imprinting, stamping it onto your mind. And so but I always ran into problems with the analog medium of being able to actually find my notes. Like I've, tried commonplace books, bullet journals. I had for 15 years, 3x5 inch, note cards using them, but it was organized by book author or topic, right? So stacks and stacks and, boxes, but I could never really find each individual thought or idea easily.
Yeah.
And the analog Zettelkasten really, really solved that problem for me. Now, what I later discovered after starting this journey is Sankey Arens got a lot of the things that he describes in his book wrong. And for instance, the one idea per note card is wrong. Lumen frequently, he created thought streams or streams of thoughts that would branch across many cards. And, there would be subcomponents in the thoughts that you can insert and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so I essentially, got to this point. This is about 2 months into trying the analog Zettelkasten version, being inspired by Sankey Arens, that I was like, you know what, if I'm going to go this deep on it, I should actually learn how it really works and see what the primary sources are. So that turned me on to, the three primary sources. The first source and the best source is the digitized online archive of Nicholas Luhmann's actual Zettelkasten
at the university.
Yep. And so I started there. And what I did is, this is a seemingly kind of crazy thing to do, is the first collection, he has got 2 Zettelkastens, which are note boxes, right? The first collection has been largely transcribed into text, German text. So what I did, this is for a few weeks, is I would go into his online archive. I would, go to each individual card. I would then translate it to English, and then I would write out by hand his actual note cards in English and the numbers, to actually understand how it flowed and how it worked. And some of the stuff that I thought he did, I was right about, but some of the stuff that I thought he did from reading Arens, I was wrong about. And I've discovered that Arens, Arens is very vague, which is fine. He was kind of get people to move along and just get him started, right?
I think Arens's main sources were Schmidt and Krajewski.
Yes, definitely Schmidt. Yeah. I don't know but yeah, maybe you know better than me. I didn't see a Krajewski, but I wasn't looking for.
Oh, Marcus Krajewski. Wasn't he? He wrote another one of those articles that I read months, about a year ago. And I think he may have been, I don't know, was it in Forgetting Machines, or I'm not sure which one it was.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. That was a good one. I discovered that much later on. Actually that's kind of how I found you, is I searched Krajewski, and I found your video. I was like, oh, this is very niche, but this is awesome. I had just read it, and it's enjoyable to, after you go deep on something and read it, to hear someone else talking about it and summarizing it. And your video was just awesome.
Thank you.
It's
Thank you.
Some people.
Well, and one of the things that I think is really brilliant about what you're doing is that you actually went to the Luman Archive, and you're actually, and you actually didn't take anybody's word for it, but did it yourself and experienced it yourself. And I think that adds a ton of value. So I'm really curious to hear more about the things that you discovered that were not actually described accurately.
Yeah. Well, here, and I'm finally getting, sorry, I've gone down these rabbit holes, but I think it's very necessary pretext to what I'm getting at, which is the second source that I went to was Nicholas Luhmann's paper that he wrote about the Zettelkasten, and it's called Communication with Note Boxes.
Right, the 1981 one.
Yep. And so when I went through that, and that's a like Luhmann's writings are, it's a dense read. That took me almost a month, honestly. And it's only maybe if you print it out, maybe 6 or 7 pages, depending on the font size. But every sentence you have to parse. So I spent time going deep on every sentence, which kind of neuro imprinted what he was really saying on my mind.
Yeah.
And in that paper, that's where you really discover what Lumen was actually talking about and what he said. He calls it, like the title of his paper is Communication with Note Boxes. And I don't really remember in Ahrens's book, it didn't talk about a lot of the elements that came out of the paper. Communication is a huge element and variable that Lumen talks about. Randomness and surprises is another huge concept that he talks about and goes really deep on. Comparison, like comparing ideas. And that is really what the practice of, the Zettelkasten forces you to do. Whenever you have a new idea, you are forced to then compare that idea with your already created set of ideas in your Zettelkasten to find the closest comparable associated nearest neighbor for it to fit next to or under, right?
Okay.
So it re-exercises your mind to be like, okay, what does this remind me of? It creates, associations. So this whole thing is an associative chain, right? Which also I didn't really find in Obsidian. Obsidian is kind of like their remote associations, and you're not necessarily forced to find. You can find like the concept and the general concept and link it to them or create tags for it. Right. But with the analog Zettelkasten, you're forced to actually find the closest nearest neighbor in that line of thought and link it to it. All right. So that's another idea. And then the other thing was, Lumen talks about in his paper how it is a communication partner. It is his second memory who he can communicate with, and it is his alter ego. And that's one of the things if you browse his notes when he was preparing that paper and talking about what the Zettelkasten was, he talks about how he doesn't have enough, there's not enough of a research budget or academic funding for him to have an assistant. So, the thing that he always relied upon was he's like, I don't need an assistant. Employees are too expensive. Right. I'm just going to use my Zettelkasten as my communication partner.
Right. Theory of everything. Time 30 years, budget 0.
Yep. So the question is have I experienced this? And I call it, I went deep into Lumen's word that he used to describe this alter ego and second mind and ghost in the box. And I call it the second mind. And it's not like a second brain is kind of like the convention used by building a second brain, Forte, and that's more getting things done, productivity. And this is not a second brain. This is actually a second mind. It is your second self, your past self, who you essentially can communicate with and have like this. It's an internal dialogue. So when you're going through your notes written in your own handwriting, seeing, different types of, even I've got like note card sizes. I've even got like 3x5 inch cards that are like lime green that I remember using in, when I was in college. This is back like, 10, 15 years ago. Right. Yeah. And so what that does is that creates and engages this almost like this internal dialogue and this external context around your thoughts. So you're like, oh, wow, that's crazy that I had that thought back then. I kind of remember where I was at the time. Right. And this essentially acts as a cue, which you see it in your own writing, to create this second mind and this almost conversation experience and this internal dialogue that goes along when you're reviewing your notes. And my point is, I have not found that in the digital, in Obsidian or the digital realm of PKM. And, part of the reason is that, like, you see your life in your past self, in that card. It took you a ton of time because you had to sit down and deliberately write by hand. And then what it also does is you can, I don't know, like with Obsidian, and at least with me, I'm like, I come across old ideas. I'm like, did I actually write that? And with this is like, you actually know, hey, I wrote that and this is in my wording. Right. And so, from that angle, it creates like yet another instantiation of that kind of like internal conversation that you have. And so,
this actually, I hate to admit it, but this has been my my archive. And, and Spotlight has been, although I would like there to be a better tool, it has been, that's still sort of the major thing, right? I still, I have, probably 4 terabytes of shit on there. And, and so, and I have been, I've been putting things into the, right. And generally, it's kind of weird because, like I sort of claimed that I think the paragraph is sort of the basic unit of thought. That doesn't tend to be the way I write. I tend to write these long, these 1,000 to 1,500, 2,000 word essays that are kind of, and that came from, I've been like journaling forever and, just sort of writing, morning notes and daily notes and journal entries and blog posts. And, since I think I've been blogging since like 1999. I used to be in high tech before I went back to grad school. But the thing that has been difficult in Obsidian for me has been, I've jammed all of this stuff in, got this beautiful looking, chart view, or
graph, bubble graphs.
Yeah, the graph view. I love that. I like the connections. There isn't really a way to sort of have a split screen thing where you can follow the connections particularly easy. So maybe that's technology that they'll develop later. But that is kind of what I'm looking for, because I'm at the point now where I'm ready to get some stuff out, right?
Yeah,
where I'm
the output.
Where I'm looking for an easier way to the output. And that's, and so when I wrote my dissertation, like I said, I had all these notes in Tinderbox in little things that looked like, 3x5 cards on my screen. But then I cut and paste those into the actual things that really look like cards in Scrivener, right? So they've got the view that looks like a nested outline. Then they've got the other view that looks like a bunch of cards that you can drag around and all of that. And that kind of struck, that was the way that I actually did it, because I thought of, my dissertation, well, it's got to be 300 pages long. My average paragraph is about, 2/3 of a page. That means I need, 500 paragraphs, right? So I need 500 of those little cards, right? And so that was like an easy, kind of an easy thing. And then I could edit, I could say, well, okay, I've said enough about that. I need to move on. But so that's one of the things that I don't feel like I'm getting right now. And it may also be that, again, that I'm not good enough as an Obsidian power user, right? Sometimes I talk to Eleanor and it's like, oh crap, this is too much. And I'm not really that interested in being on the Discord and talking about the new latest.
Yeah, you don't want to be a professional note taker. You want to actually be a writer and create knowledge that.
Well, yeah, and at one point in my life, I was a Unix system administrator, and I knew how to code in C and C++, but that was a long, long time ago, and I don't know how to do that stuff anymore. And I don't really want to, you don't want to
major in the minor. You want to do what you want to create. You want to become. You don't want to be a note-taking machine. You want to be a writing machine. You want to be a knowledge machine. You want to create. You want to create. You want to have a system to do research, and then you want to have a way to easily have it. Create output. Yeah. If you on my channel, there's a way. It's funny is you'll see there's like videos. There's a few videos that it's how to write a book using an analog Zettelkasten. And for a long time, to backtrack, I've been working on a book explaining this and going into like the deep theoretical knowledge and basically a book on creating an analog Zettelkasten. I created the term and I started calling it an Antinet because I thought that sounded cooler than continuing to call it an analog Zettelkasten.
Okay.
And an Antinet then has, developed its own acronym. The ANTI, is analog numeric alpha card addresses. There's like the starting with the numbers and then ending in an alpha character.
Yeah.
And then tree, because each one branches down a tree index. And it's a network of that. But it's also, a double entendre jab at the the overly digital world in the internet. So it sounds like anti-internet, right? A little bit too.
So. It does. I was wondering about that. I was wondering,
Yeah.
how anti the network are, and are there some network effects, that you are taking advantage of, and and are there some things that because I'm not, I'm not feeling like I'm a member of, and to their credit, Obsidian didn't, go quite as cultish as Rome did. But I don't feel like I have to, only use Obsidian. I think there might be some things that Obsidian might still do for me, but I'm really, really curious about this idea of, and I actually did. I designed a course for faculty in my state system, or I co-designed, and I ran the course on retrieval practice. And so a lot of the stuff that you're saying about, sort of building these mental hooks, and the fact that, that what in retrieval practice, they call it desirable difficulty, right? Where you have to, take the time to do the work of, physically writing something out. I can, and Aaron's, I think, was aware. I mean, as I was reading that, and I read it twice, it did seem to me that he was aware of retrieval practice, because he's using a lot of that terminology, in kind of a way that seemed very familiar to me. But it didn't. Yeah, but it did also seem to be, kind of missing that output end. Right, that he sort of waved his hands at some, at some things, and sort of doubled down on some of the promises and the claims that Luman and Schmidt had made about, how these insights, how the slipbox becomes greater than the sum of the parts, and how these insights are kind of formed. Where I'm actually going with it right now this month is I actually have a writing handbook that my father, who was an English teacher when I was a kid, and then he became a lecturer at UC Davis, and he was a lecturer, not a he got his PhD there, but then in comp lit, and then he stayed, and he didn't go the tenure track, so he taught all of the survey courses, and that all of the ancients, the medievals, the moderns, all of the canonical literature. And that was kind of really what he liked to do. But he wrote this, this writing handbook because the students didn't know how to write. And he just donated it to Davis, and they ran it off at the copy shop and sold it to students for like $1.75 or something. And when he retired, I took it over, and I actually I started using it for my students when I was a grad student, and then I use it here at my job in Bemidji. And I thought, well, okay, what if and I added, and he had done it specifically for the humanities, right, for writing essays about literature, and I had added kind of a social sciences thing with examples, of social science writing. And then I was thinking, well, if I revised it now, it's been about, 5 or 10 years since it's been out there, then I could add this note-taking thing, because that's sort of the thing that's assumed, right? He talked a little bit about, when you're taking notes, when you're highlighting, these are the things to sort of look for. But then it was always very open-ended, right? And so I was thinking, well, maybe I'll add a piece that, that includes, some different examples that won't, that I don't want to require my students. And actually, it's kind of funny because I introduced one student who was working on her senior thesis to Obsidian, and she went crazy with it. We're having a little thunderstorm here.
Yeah, there you go.
And and so she had a blast with it, and I made a video with her about, her, and it told her some things, right, that she wouldn't have seen otherwise. And so I thought that was kind of a nice moment. And then I had another thesis student who I said, how are you organizing? And she said, oh, I've just got cards, and I go, and I get a room, I get a study room at the library with a big table, and I just put them down and I move them around, and
yeah.
Said, oh my God, take a picture of that next time you do that, because
that's exactly what I did organizing my my book. And then you could file it. I filed it in my Zettelkasten. And there's something, I mean, so what you described is you kind of did that same thing with Scrivener. You essentially used note cards to kind of outline the book. And I used my physical desk, and I created 3x5 inch cards that had then card links to the specific areas in my Antinet, essentially that I wanted to pull from. And those sections emerged, in this I would call it this emergent way, unplanned way. Cool. Right. Then I went through, after I kind of finished, I spent about 6 months researching, and then, kind of going back and creating the main sections. And then when you're doing this, you create kind of like little subtopics within the main branch that you're working on. And then I put, the subtopics on 3x5 inch cards with the links in them, and then rearranged it all on my, one big table over there. Right. And created like a bunch of columns.
I watched that video where you had a bunch.
Yeah. And then just worked column by column, chapter by chapter. And, it's just something about that, it seems to so, it's just the elementary process, but it just works. And that's something that, that worked for me when came time to writing. And I mean, the thing that I've experienced from the analog Zettelkasten is that, the writing experience. So, there's a few phases. There's when Luman would read a book, he had a vertical, 4x6 inch card essentially, and he would write, vertically, very concise page number, and then the concise idea. And then after his reading session, he would go through and be like, okay, which ones do I want to actually develop into main 4x6 inch cards, and write by hand as if I'm writing and explaining and putting it into my research paper, or essentially a research paper, because a lot of
that's the moment when it becomes the writing. You're writing either for your future self, or you're writing for an external audience.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And one of the things that people kind of overlook is if you factor in and calculate 600 research papers over the span that he wrote, he was writing every month he was working on between 1 or 2 research papers at a time. Yeah. And so he would take on these publication requests, which essentially served as his, main, essentially, small milestones and small projects, which then each of those small pieces and sections and lines of thoughts that he would create from that would end up and create like a cohesive, much bigger, book. And that's how he was able to kind of take this, that material and then be like, oh, you know what, I have enough for a book right here in this chunk. Now I'm going to take all of the content and knowledge that I have been essentially unearthed from reading and from creating these research paper projects into a book. And so, so he would read, with I call them bib cards, bibliography cards, on the front, in horizontal, he had it organized by author last name. On the back, he had those very brief bib notes, or, brief observation notes. And then he would take them and he would create main notes out of them, the main 4x6 inch cards. And then, the way that he would find it, every single card he had in the top right corner, he had that numeric alpha card address. I call it numeric alpha because it always started with a number, and it also fit my acronym scheme of the Antinet. Yep. And so then he would, kind of develop the thought, and that's the knowledge development process, right there. And, things would then emerge. So in my experience writing, I would take the thick set of, main cards, put them next to my desk, and being writing. And when I'm writing, I'm starting kind of like writing word for word, but then I would like have to like re-understand what I, what I actually wrote and the meaning I interpreted. So then I would, while I'm writing into my, word editor, right, I'm kind of re-having that conversation, re-understanding my old second mind, my past self. But also doing that is like just writing word for word is boring. So you're also having fun with it. And, you're adding more material, you're concise, you're consolidating things, you're making things a lot clearer, so that by the time that, your readers actually read your material, it's been taken through it's been multiple processes. So it's like a multi-process.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, they just, they sit down at a blank screen and they, writer's block. And by the time they hit the publish button, their thoughts haven't really been that deeply processed. So you're not, putting something out there that is even worth necessarily reading in the first place. When you do this, you're like, the material that you're writing have also stemmed from not just you're not just having a communication with yourself, experience with yourself. You're having a communication experience during that time you're reading, a communication experience with the author. And this is something that Mortimer Adler talks about in his book called How to Read a Book. He calls, reading a book and reading an author as a communication experience. So you're conversing not only with that author, but also all of the people and, that have communicated with that author and with that author. And it's like this line. So you're kind of continuing this deep thought dialogue and carrying it forth. So anyway, that's another unique workflow that I just haven't experienced myself using, Obsidian Digital and
I think that Aaron's tries to get there with this idea of literature notes and permanent notes, but I think actually I prefer the way that you've described it, actually, as bib cards and bib notes, and then moving on to main notes. Because one of the things that I tend to do is, and for the longest time, actually, I resisted using any type of automation, and then finally I relented and I let Readwise sweep my highlights into Obsidian, and then, and they go in a separate folder, and then I would kind of process those. So I've got all, I would have all of these notes from, something like Fooled by Randomness, right? Or even worse, Anti-Fragile, right? Where he's he's drawing from, and it's like, oh yeah, I remember that from what's his name? Kahneman, right? Because he's because he's channeling Kahneman. And so I would notice these things. I think the problem, actually the thing, I think that was probably what I should say is, I think that was probably a mistake doing the sweep, because then I had too much, right? And then I've got this really long
over selection.
Yeah, I've got this really long set of reading notes that can go on, for a couple thousand words. Excuse me, I'm just going to close this window.
Yeah, no worries.
That should make it a little quieter. And so then the challenge was, okay, which of these ideas do I really care about? And so that transition, I think, from the bib notes to the main notes, and probably, you're right, having them, and maybe I will get some 4x6 cards, because it would be kind of tight on the back of one of these. But even 4x6, even having just 4 inches to write, maybe 1-2 lines about each idea would be a valuable discipline.
Yeah, I think what I found is what it forces is forces you to be very concise with the ideas, and you don't want to get bogged down by reading. It also forces you, because it's easy, a lot easier. I used to read, Kindle and have a ton of Kindle highlights, and anything that like I was trying to concentrate on, even, I would highlight, and then I would be inundated with highlights, and I'm like, wait, which one's really important? Right. So what it kind of forces you to do is like, it forces you to not fall into the over selection. You want to select less, you want to extract less from the books you are reading, and then you want to even develop less from those extractions, because it forces you to like, only focus on really the key core ideas that really fit into what you're actually working on. Because like it arranges how many notes he took from each book, but like even if books had like 30 bib notes on them, 30 observations and individual entries with a page number. If you look at he had like 15,000 bib cards in his second Zettelkasten, and if you do the ratio is for every book and for every bib card, he only created about 3 or 4 main notes. So that's a lot of people think, oh, if I'm going to create 30 little brief observations, 30 different page numbers, I'm going to have to actually create main permanent notes out of every single one of those 30. It's like, you don't. Like on average, he created only four main notes, essentially, that furthered his idea. Of course, you can use those other ones.
Examples of that main idea that are
exactly
repeated in the book. Yeah. So he goes from 15,000 bib notes to about 90,000 main notes.
I think he had like 60,000 or something. Maybe the grand total of all
67,000,
I believe it was.
That's about 4.5 to 1 then.
Yeah, 67,000, I believe. I have like his
cool.
Something like that. Right. So yeah, that's another thing is,
Oh wow, that's funny. Your YouTube just notified me of your video on making mistakes in analog Zettelkasten.
Oh yeah, I recorded that one yesterday. Yeah, that's funny.
All right.
yeah. In that one, because a lot of people they get scared about, oh, I need to like perfectly plan it, especially with the branches and the numbers, the fixed numbers. It's like people are like, I used the academic disciplinary fields and like the Wikipedia's outline just as like a rough fuzzy category, as like like an outline structure, and that's something Lumen used as well. Like he had 11 top level categories for his second Zettelkasten, that were very specific on his theory of everything for society, right? One would be like functionalism, and they went up to the branches went up to 4 numbers. So he didn't just start at random, like 1, 2, 3, 4. He had like a very rough.
Yeah, that makes more sense. The last time I tried very, very briefly to do something with cards, I started with 1, and then I wasn't sure if I should go to 2 or should it be 1A, and then that was a little bit too much friction.
Yeah. I mean, and he went up to 4 digits, so he would have like 1134 was his ideology. So it's like 1134/1 was like definition of ideology. 1134/2 was ideology in economy, and like so he kind of broke it up like that. And so when he wrote 1, it actually maps to 1,000. He just didn't want to bother writing 1,000, he would just do 1. But that was like the top level category.
So and it does seem like and I think I noticed it in one of your videos, the 2 kind of index cards. One of the things, one of the kind of perennial conversations that we've been having in this book club when we do talk about Obsidian and note-taking systems is that idea of top down or bottom up, map content, or is that too notiony? Is that too prearranged? You gotta have a folder for everything before you even know what you're gonna put in it, kind of thing.
Yeah. Those are kind of like the buzzwords that I would say make more sense in the digital realm. And, that whole school of thought and conventions, like the map of content and all of that. And I'm trying to like explain it within like the analog realm of kind of how that works. And, it's essentially like, think of like the main box, the set of the cards as like your own tree think of it like as your own tree of knowledge, that kind of going back. That's like one of the oldest metaphors that I think people keep going back to. Like, I think even Aristotle, went back to, is like, mapping knowledge and using a metaphor as like a tree structure. So think of like the your main box as your tree of knowledge. Each individual leaf on your tree is a note card. And each individual position of each leaf has like its own address, right? And it's not like it's a hierarchy, like the leaf on like the top branch isn't more important than the leaf on the bottom branch. It's just the location. It's the coordinates. That's what the numeric alpha card addresses are. It's just the coordinates, the latitude, longitude of the location of where it's at on the tree. Right. So you can kind of know and be like, oh, I'm going to, go up to the top. The top branch I know is like the, social sciences branch and, the history branch. And I'm going to continue to follow along. And I can kind of continue to move along the number sequences to kind of find things. But above that, if you want to do that, you can do that. That's like kind of like exploring your tree of knowledge one by one by moving along the branches. But if you are thinking, oh, like peppermint, like the keyword peppermint, the separate map onto your tree and like the location, that's what the index is. So that's where the index I've in one of these, my top box right here, and it's just let's see. It's just alphabetized based on
by keyword.
Yeah. And the keyword there's that I think of. So I would have peppermint and I would go to peppermint P, you look it up. I'll just show you like an example of like one. Here's like in P, I've like population, like, and I've created, this is something Lumen didn't do, but I create like individual note cards for each big key term, like, so I can alphabetize it. So that's population, and then geography, and I have that card address, and that's like my geo coordinate, like, so population of China, population, geography, cities, 2236, right? So you would say peppermint, and then you just pull in that box and go to like, let's say it's 2236. And then when you follow 2236, you can follow that all the way down and that whole line of thought around peppermint, and which, like peppermint for your thesis, right? Which there's probably, 15 different subtopics within that. And within that subtopics, you can continue branching down and getting. And so when you write that way, you're almost writing, it's almost like, imagine if imagine if Obsidian wasn't like a bunch of atomic notes, but one just massive document with bullet points and nested bullet points. That's like essentially what, that branch is. And your job, anytime you want to add a new piece of knowledge, is to add it under, or after the nearest, most similar bullet point, which is the thought,
That I think is going to be the key to this whole discipline. That's the thing that's really kind of resonating with me and kind of echoing the most in this conversation, is as something that I'm not doing that would make my process more successful is actually sitting with, not, okay, I've got this book and I got to get these notes out of it and get them all onto cards and jam the cards into a drawer. But rather that, I want to sit with this, when it goes from the bib note to being a main note, then I have to actually ask myself, what's the closest connection that's in the box already?
Yeah. And how can I continue that line of thought of what I've already started working on and established? That way, that makes it 10 times easier when you get down to the output, the writing phase. You just grab this like, continually developed line of thought from 15 different books and sources, right, that are just like that. When someone reads that output, they're like, how in the hell did you like write this, assemble this? You're like, you're coming up with this like long depth string of knowledge and idea that's supported by 15 different that you're relating in your own words from 15 different books or sources. Yeah, that's the thing. You don't want to be left to do that, which I think that's what Obsidian kind of the workflow kind of does, is they're like, okay, just create this like interlinked set of ideas. But when it comes time to writing the paper, then you're left with like actually creating that continuous line of thought, and that's difficult. That's hard.
And it becomes kind of random and arbitrary. And I think that was one of the things that, in the book club, when we're reading Aaron's, we got to the part where he's talking about, what's his name? Malcolm McLean and the container,
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And I teach, in one of my modern world theory, when I talk about globalism, I actually talk about Malcolm McLean and, and the containers, and it comes from that book, The Box, right? That came out a few years ago. And, in the first place, Aaron's gets the story kind of wrong, but in the second place, it's sort of like, where did this come from?
He's kind of pulling from a bunch of random.
Right. It was in there, it was in there, and he jammed it together sort of after the fact.
Because Lumen didn't use his notes weren't just containers necessarily perfect atomic pieces, right? Like I think the human mind and thoughts are a little bit more complex than that. It's like, the atomicity. He said 1 note per idea. That's a myth, and a lot of people get hung up on that. And look, when I got that whole idea of atomic design, it's taken shape and taken hold of like the web developers and UI UX people. Like the concept kind of came from that space where people started. They're like, here's a UI UX framework called atomic design, where an atom, is or text is a button, and a container is, or text is an atom, a container is an atom. When you combine both, you create a molecule called a button. And then when you combine that molecule with an input box, that creates a search molecule. And then that's like an organelle, and people get like all crazy with like all this stuff. And you're like, wait, abstracting away. You're like, what are you doing? And that's kind of what I think the atomic thing is captured note takers. So I think going back to is you're like, how anti are you? I'm actually not a Luddite, I use Zotero frequently, especially for writing, like I didn't write, that's like for thinking a lot of people get carried away. And this is what I found. There was no one out there actually showing and teaching people how to do the analog Zettelkasten. A year and a half ago when I was on this journey, I had to reverse engineer it the hard way and spend like a year of my life, thankfully
it's really going to pay off, because I think you've got something really unique here. Because until I started watching, YouTube videos of people, in the PKM space, the only time I had heard the word Zettelkasten was, I think Beck Tench had said it in the context of trying to use Tinderbox as a Zettelkasten tool. I think there is, I think that you have sort of gotten your hooks into some of these details that get missed. And when they get missed, it is detrimental to the user who's trying to pull together some stuff and not really show off the beauty of their graph view, but rather, and I love watching the graph view build. And, so I'm talking about myself. I'm talking about myself here, but actually get something out of it on the other end. So I think this is, so I think you're really onto something, and I'm excited to, kind of watch you continue to develop it.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. And what I was saying there is, and for you and your audience is like, I've got a few people, and they're on, YouTube. They've created like some YouTube videos of it. I think the main thing is to experiment and try the analog version in Lumen's precise workflow yourself, so that then you can understand, okay, this is what I'm actually trying to do or create in Obsidian, if you decide to go back digital and, or, create whatever workflow that you want, but I think too many people don't ever try the analog version of Zettelkasten. And then they, then they're left without kind of like the core foundational idea of what it's supposed to be like, so that they then get lost with all the bells and whistles that Obsidian has to offer. And believe me, it's endless, all the community plugins and all that stuff. Like, man, I spent so many time. It's fun, it's like, it's a great app and it's fast and, but at the same time, you're like, I hit a point where I was like, wait, I've just created a bunch of information, but no actual knowledge. And I'm much further away than I was hoping to be with my project. So, And
cool. So I'm looking at this thing, and I've been looking at it on your videos too. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4 by 4. So you got 16 and 2 on top. So how many notes you got in there?
I haven't counted them. And not all of them are completely full either. And also, like I mentioned, is I have a few boxes that are not integrated, that don't have like the card addresses integrated into them. So I haven't really backwards compatibilized my 3 by 5 inch cards that I've gotten that I've took for like 10 to 15 years. Yeah, but I'll show you the main one. This is the one that I used to write my Antinet Zettelkasten book. And, I spent 6 months, reading, researching, creating the main notes. Right. And then 3 months writing. And the insane thing is, this is what like a lot of people have said, is that, those 3 months I wrote 190,000 words. It's like, depending on like whatever the size, it's like 600 pages. Right.
Yeah,
and so
big volume.
Yeah. So I did experience firsthand, what Schmidt says, and it's as advertised, how to actually become a publication and a writing machine. And I saw it because, so this is kind of like the main types of cards and stuff.
So, so now how your main notes, how multi-threaded or how useful in different contexts do you expect them to be?
So I have, this is within the branch. That whole kind of cabinet is the 4214, which is in like information science, and it started out as the Zettelkasten, because like information science and related to Zettelkasten, and then over time it became like the Antinet book, right? But within that there's a bunch of different ideas, and like for instance I have like this one, not all of them are, I call them reflection notes. Reflection notes are kind of like notes that you write for an actual audience. Some are like me reading and then kind of what I call reformulation notes, like reformulating and creating a formula of it. So this one is on perception versus perspective, right? And so and then like, the note after this. So that's, as you can see, like maybe I can.
Yep. Okay.
Then the note after that is 3AB/2A. So I'm kind of, this is like a variation of that. An
expansion.
Where I go into the etymology, like per sapere, which means to thoroughly and fully understand and interpret. That's what perception is, where perspective is to observe and to spectate. And, so I'm going into this stuff. And so here's where I'm going with this example, right? I just randomly pulled this out of this section, right? And then here's me actually thinking through it more by creating a diagram. You can see there's like some whiteout of perspective, right? Perspective is like where you are, your XYZ coordinates, where you are positioned in space, your perspective of what you see, and then your perception is how you actually interpret what you see. So different people can have different perspectives and their perceptions and their own, or they can have the same perspective in different perceptions, right? And so this forms kind of like a core aspect in one of the theoretical chapters of my book about how this whole Antinet Zettelkasten thing, it changes your, you get a bunch of different perspectives locked and stamped in time that then when you go back, you can then rewrite based on a new perception that you had in your most recent readings.
Yeah.
And, it kind of like locks that in time. Now, the question is, okay, that's within the context of me writing about Zettelkasten and the Zettelkasten book. Now, when I go to my index over here, right, if I look up perspective or perception, right, and I later want to write about that, which I have, like it's in here somewhere, right? If I look it up, I then see, yeah, here it is. Yeah, and it points me there. So this is perception.
Cool.
Right. And then it points me versus perception, definition, in like other different contexts. So then I can write a whole, piece, book, even chapter on the concept of perspective, perception, and to use all of the knowledge that I created within this book, right? Or within this line of work related to the other lines of works. Like I have perspective and memory and learning, and these are all in like the same like general branch, but you can see how I can then, link it and kind of create it all together and use this line of thought. And the creativity happens when you have all these chunks of knowledge, put it on your desk, rewrite it, have the recommunication experience, rewriting it into your editor, using it. It's just so much, there's just so much benefits of having it tactile laid out on your desk. So that, this one section, this one thought, knowledge session that I had like a year ago, then creates a huge section, not only in my book, but like, further sections forever. So you can see kind of the compounding effect, right? Cool. And that's kind of how it works. And the reason why that's good is that I'm only surfacing and only having like the most important pieces of knowledge related to perspective. And that's where a lot of people are like, oh, what about digital search? How can you find anything? It's like, I don't want to be able to I don't want to search perspective in Obsidian and find, 88 different search results that have the term perspective in it, because it's going to drown out the actual good, the important stuff that I'm looking for.
I think you're right about that. I think that I put in one of my Obsidian vaults, I put that thing at the bottom. There's a plugin that'll tell you all your linked mentions and your unlinked mentions. And that is, I think, potentially counterproductive. I think that you're really onto something with this idea of the index card and making it a regular part of your practice whenever you're writing a card to say, okay, this should go on the perspective or the perception index card.
Yeah. The index. Yeah. It's like a second layer map, to the
top level. Yeah. To the top level card, which is exactly what you want, and does seem to be it does honestly seem to be very true to the Luman process, which I think is, again, and I'm not that, sort of religious about doing what Luman did, but I do think that it worked. And so, I should have a good reason not to, right? If I'm going to say, well, I'm going to use this, and I don't think that an adequate reason is only, is because this particular digital tool allows me. And initially, I think there was a lot of excitement about the idea that we would be able to avoid, we'd be able to get more benefit for less work. But I'm not feeling that anymore. So I think you've accomplished your mission here.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think the people that I see, they've never tried out or questioned and never tried the analog, and I think that's something. Okay, try building it out first. Don't necessarily commit to doing it long term, but then just take what you kind of learn from that and implement it into the workflow, of Obsidian, because, there's also a lot of people. The number one thing they're resisting is like the sunk cost fallacy of like, they've got, thousands, tens of thousands, like let's say, of digital notes, and they're like, okay, so here you are coming along, Scott, saying that that sucks and that's irrelevant. It's like, no, I'm not necessarily saying that. I mean, I am, but I'm not. No, I'm just kidding. But I do think that the when I switched, I have 1,000 notes locked in Obsidian. A lot of this, I haven't missed them though. It's like, that's the thing. And yeah.
Well, so. I think that that maybe there's a place, in between where the big note, the elaborated note, can be in Obsidian, or can be in, can be on this drive in a some type of other format, in a word processing format, or in a or in a spreadsheet, or in a because again, sort of the transcribed letter or whatever, so then maybe the citation, and the bibliographic part and the high level takeaways from that, go on a bib card. Maybe not the whole thing, maybe that's this moment of translation from, this is the actual text to this is, because a lot of my data is, both in historiography, you gotta deal with, what other people have said in the past, and then especially in primary sources, right? You have to reflect them accurately, but then you also have to explain them to the reader and interpret them and contextualize them and make them part of a narrative or an argument to that. So I think there is a place for, probably both of those things to exist. I don't think I'm going to start. One of the things I'm doing I'm changing up the way I do my U.S. history survey this fall. I'm going to actually it's a 3-day-a-week class where we meet for about an hour. And I used to do lecture discussion. And now I think I'm going to do lecture. They're still going to be, they're still going to interact with sort of the facts in a lecture kind of a format. But then I'm going to lean real heavily on primary sources, so they actually hear the voices of the people, who lived at the time, both the elite people and then the non-elites and the dissenting voices. And so I'm going to do much more of that. So I'm transcribing, and luckily I'm doing US 1 this semester. So it's all stuff that, all the primary sources are out of copyright, even if they were published, right? So I can find them, I can put them into a form that the students can read them. I'm actually making videos where I read them, for the YouTube crowd. And then I still have to, kind of contextualize them and explain them and, and make them fun. So that, I think, certainly, that's what this little stack of cards right here is the, not only, which ones I'm using, but what I'm kind of saying about them. So I think that's, I think I'm going to try this out. And, and I don't want to take too much more of your time today, but I would like to, kind of maybe try this out for a while and then kind of connect back with you and, and I'll continue watching, what you're doing as YouTube.
Yeah. Sounds good. Yeah. There's I think the anatomy of the Antinet Zettelkasten is a good video that gives you an overview. I have the like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Antinet Zettelkasten on my my Twitter profile.
Okay.
And the first half of that is kind of the theory and the prep and like mindset stuff. So I've it's a lot, the first half. So don't get too hung up on the first half, right? But halfway through, I have take out the note card, write this down on it, and just follow those steps and you'll have it. There's essentially 3 main boxes. There's the index box, the main box, which are those main notes, and then the bib box, which are the bibliography notes. And the whole process starts with the bib cards, and then extracting that, creating main cards, and then, creating the index term to point to the that main card, that card address. And yeah, that's how it works. You don't want to get index fatigue early on. You don't want to create an index entry for every single card because it's going to just take way too long. But like the main kind of subtopics, in that branch, you
yeah.
back
Well,
and
actually maybe in a few weeks, once I've got some, we can meet again, because then the other thing that I would like to explore with you a little bit is the review process, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll look for for videos on your channel as well about that. But that's another thing, that I'm sort of curious about, because I haven't developed a great weekly review, kind of thing, just in sort of GTD terms either. So this is a thing, a project for me for the next semester, I guess. But but that process, seeing how you do that, and sort of, do you have an inbox of these things, or you just
nope.
do in real time, and they go right in?
Here's the other important thing is, well, in early on, you won't have to do this as much, like when you're first creating, like your first maybe week. But what I do now, when I get, like extract like some of the basic observation notes onto the bib card, before I actually write out the main card and create the main note, right, is I will figure out where it's going to go. So it forces me to review in my main box and review the line of thought and be like, okay, I'm going to put it, say I have 4214/1A. I'm going to be like, I'm going to put this at 4214/1A/1 and kind of continue that line of thought. That's how, and so you're doing your review before you actually write out the main card. And
you know why you're doing it.
Yeah, because when I used to just create like the main cards and then try to figure out after that where it goes, you're just creating a pile of homework for yourself. And believe it or not, you don't want to do that. You don't want to like create 15 cards that you have to then file. And then what happens is when you go back to like file them, you're like, wait, I already pretty much, that's redundant. I already kind of said that, so it's like, that's why you don't want to write out the main card before you find out where it's going to go.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Pro tip. Thank you.
Pro tip. Yeah. I'm just blitzing you with all of this analog knowledge stuff. So yeah, good luck. I created the YouTube channel just spur of the moment. It's kind of a rabbit hole. It's like a spaghetti code essentially, right? To learn this thing.
Yeah.
I have the book that is in editing phase right now. And then I'm simultaneously like I would say half my time is spent pushing that along and editing that, and the other half of my time is trying to create a course in a very clear, linear, step-by-step method, to teach people this whole system essentially. Cool. And so but
this is so, this is really valuable stuff. So I'm gonna turn this into a video, and I'll put it on my channel, and so hopefully a lot of the people who are kind of power users, who are book club members and stuff, already knew you, but hopefully this will get you a little bit more, because I do think I have it's kind of weird, I have people in strange places. I have a lot of people in the UK, I have a lot of people in India for some reason. And it may be because I occasionally say things about East Asian history that they appreciate, like that the Aryan invasion was a myth or something like that. They all glom onto that, and then they stay for the other stuff sometimes.
Yeah, so, that's awesome. Yeah. Well, I enjoy your stuff and enjoy your channel. I guess I even the history stuff, I'll brush up on that and try to read that. But yeah, I hope what I've shared helps you out, and look forward to hearing about your journey. I'm willing to hop on anytime, and so
thanks a lot.
Cool.
Thanks very much, Scott.
All right, Dan. Talk to you later, man.
Take care.
All right. Bye.